What if everything you learned about human history in school was wrong? Not slightly off, not missing a few details, fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. What if I told you that, scattered across this planet, buried under deserts, hidden inside mountains, and sunk beneath oceans, there are 7 discoveries so impossible, so defiant of every timeline we've been taught, that mainstream science either can't explain them or flat out refuses to try? These aren't myths. These aren't legends whispered around campfires. These are physical objects and structures you can touch, measure, and photograph. And they shouldn't exist. Drop your wildest theory in the comments right now. Smash that like button if ancient mysteries keep you up at night, and subscribe so you don't miss a single secret we dig up next. Because today, we're going deep. Here's the thing about history. We treat it like a finished puzzle. Every piece accounted for, every date confirmed, every civilization neatly categorized and filed away. Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, a clean, comfortable ladder from primitive caves to modern skyscrapers. It makes sense. It feels safe. And for most of us, the story ends there because we never bother to look at the pieces that don't fit. But those pieces exist, and there are more of them than the academic establishment would like you to know. In mines across South Africa, engineers have pulled metallic spheres from rock strata dated to 2.8 billion years ago. In Colombia, ancient goldsmiths crafted miniature objects that look suspiciously like modern jet aircraft. In Turkey, a temple complex predates agriculture itself by thousands of years. These aren't fringe claims from tinfoil hat forums. These are documented, peer-reviewed, laboratory-tested anomalies that sit in museum vaults and university archives, quietly mocking everything we think we know about the human story. Today, we're going to walk through 7 of the most staggering ancient discoveries ever made. 7 objects and structures that engineers, physicists, and archaeologists have studied for decades and still cannot fully explain. Some of them suggest technologies that shouldn't have existed for thousands of years after they appeared. Others hint at civilizations so advanced that their very existence would rewrite our textbooks from page 1. And a few of them are so bizarre, so utterly out of place in the archaeological record, that the only honest response is silence, followed by a very uncomfortable question. What else have we gotten wrong? Let's begin with a discovery that sat in a museum basement for 2 years, because nobody realized it was more valuable than all the gold found beside it. In the spring of 1900, a crew of Greek sponge divers sheltering from a storm near the tiny island of Antikythera decided to check the seafloor while they waited for calmer waters. The first diver who descended came back up in a panic. He babbled about a pile of dead bodies on the ocean floor. When the captain went down to investigate, he found not corpses, but something arguably more haunting: the wreckage of a Roman cargo ship, surrounded by bronze statues corroded into ghostly shapes. The divers spent months hauling up treasures, marble figures, gold jewelry, pottery. Among the haul was a lump of corroded bronze about the size of a shoebox, green with oxidation and fused with rock. It was tossed into a crate and forgotten in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. Nobody gave it a second glance for nearly 2 years. Then, in May of 1902, archaeologist Valerio Stais noticed that the lump had cracked. Inside the crack, he saw something that made his blood run cold: a gear, a tiny, precisely cut, interlocking gear. In a Greek artifact dated to roughly 100 BC, there was a mechanical gear that had no business existing for another 1,500 years. The scientific community erupted. Skeptics insisted it was a hoax. Someone must have dropped a modern clock into the water. Historians argued that the Greeks built temples, not machines. For decades, the artifact was treated like an embarrassment, a glitch in the record that was easier to ignore than explain. It took the invention of high-resolution X-ray tomography in the early 2000s to finally reveal what was hiding inside that corroded lump. And it was far more shocking than anyone had imagined. The Antikythera Mechanism contained at least 37 interlocking bronze gears, housed in a wooden case the size of a thick book. A single hand crank on the side drove the entire system. When you turned that crank, the mechanism calculated the positions of the sun, the moon, and at least 5 planets. It predicted lunar and solar eclipses years in advance. It even accounted for the irregular elliptical orbit of the moon. a mathematical concept that wouldn't be formally described until Johannes Kepler in the 17th century. This wasn't a toy. This was a portable analog computer of staggering sophistication. And here's what still haunts researchers. There's nothing before it and nothing after it. No prototype models, no simpler predecessors, no evolutionary chain of increasingly complex devices leading up to it. The mechanism appears in the historical record like a lightning bolt from a clear sky, and then vanishes completely. Whatever knowledge created it died with its makers and didn't resurface for over a millennium. The mainstream explanation is that it represents the peak of Hellenistic scientific achievement, possibly built by a workshop connected to the legendary astronomer Hipparchus. And that's a perfectly reasonable answer, but it doesn't explain the gap. It doesn't explain how an entire tradition of precision gear cutting could exist, produce a masterpiece, and then evaporate without a trace. Unless, of course, it wasn't the only one, and the others simply haven't been found yet. Now, let's travel from a sunken ship in the Mediterranean to one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, a wind-blasted plateau nearly 4,000 meters above sea level in the Bolivian Andes. Because if the Antikythera Mechanism challenges what we know about ancient knowledge, what I'm about to show you challenges what we know about ancient muscle. Puma Punku sits near the ancient city of Tiwanaku in western Bolivia, and even in photographs, it looks wrong. Not wrong in the sense of ugly or chaotic. Wrong in the sense of too perfect, too precise, too modern for a ruin that mainstream archaeology dates to around 536 AD. The site is littered with massive blocks of andesite and diorite, two of the hardest volcanic stones on the planet. Some of these blocks weigh over 130 tons. But the weight isn't the mystery is the cuts. These blocks have been shaped with a precision that makes modern engineers uncomfortable. We're talking perfectly flat surfaces polished to a mirror finish. Right angles so exact that when you lay a machinist's square against them, there's zero deviation. Complex interlocking H-shaped joints that would require computer-aided design software to replicate today. And drill holes bored into the hardest stone on Earth, with a smoothness and consistency that suggests rotary tools operating at high speed. The official explanation is that the builders of Puma Punku achieved all of this using stone hammers, bronze chisels, and sand abrasives. And to be fair, experimental archaeologists have demonstrated that you can shape stone with stone tools, given enough time, enough labor, and enough patience. But there's a catch. Bronze cannot cut diorite. It's physically impossible. Diorite registers between 6 and 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Bronze sits at about 3.5. Trying to carve diorite with bronze is like trying to scratch a diamond with a stick of butter. So, what did they use? Nobody knows. There are no tool marks consistent with any known ancient technology. There's no evidence of the enormous quantities of abrasive sand that would have been needed. And there's no satisfactory explanation for how blocks weighing as much as a locomotive were transported to a site at nearly 13,000 feet of elevation, far from any quarry. Alternative theorists have pointed to Puma Punku as evidence of a lost pre-flood civilization that possessed advanced machining technology. Skeptics counter that we simply underestimate what determined humans can accomplish with basic tools over long periods. Both sides make compelling arguments, but the stones themselves remain silent and perfect, waiting for someone to explain them without hand-waving. Speaking of stones that shouldn't exist where they do, let's hop across the Pacific to an island where the mystery isn't just how the stones were carved, it's how they got there at all. Easter Island sits over 2,000 miles from the nearest inhabited land, a tiny volcanic speck in the vast emptiness of the southeastern Pacific Ocean. And yet, scattered across its grassy slopes like sentinels frozen in mid-March, stand 887 giant stone statues known as moai. The largest erected moai stands nearly 10 meters tall and weighs approximately 82 tons. One unfinished statue still lying in the quarry at Rano Raraku would have stood over 21 meters tall and weighed an estimated 270 tons. Heavier than a fully loaded Boeing 747. The Rapa Nui people carved these colossi from compressed volcanic ash using basalt hand picks. On that point, the evidence is clear. The quarry is littered with thousands of broken picks, and the carving technique is well understood. But carving is only half the story. Moving them is the part that breaks brains. Some Moai were transported over 18 kilometers from the quarry to their final platforms, across rough terrain with no wheels, no draft animals, and no metal tools. How? In 2011, researchers from the University of Hawaii proposed a theory that stunned the academic world. They suggested the statues were designed to be walked, rocked from side to side, while teams of people pulled ropes to guide them forward, like tilting a heavy refrigerator and shuffling it across a kitchen floor. The team successfully walked a replica Moai down a road using just 18 people and 3 ropes. It was elegant, it was simple, and it explained the peculiar forward-leaning design of the statues, which had always puzzled scholars. But it didn't explain everything. It didn't explain the pukao, the massive red stone cylinders, some weighing over 12 tons, that were placed on top of the Moai's heads like hats. How do you lift 12 tons of stone and balance it on top of a 10-meter statue without cranes? A 2018 study in the Journal of Archaeological Science proposed that the pukao were rolled up earthen ramps and levered into position. A feat of engineering that would require extraordinary planning and coordination from a population that never exceeded about 15,000 people. The deeper mystery of Easter Island isn't logistical, it's motivational. Why? Why would a small, isolated population on a resource-poor island devote the vast majority of their labor and materials to carving and transporting giant stone faces? The ancestors they honored must have been immensely important. Or perhaps the rituals served a purpose we haven't yet understood. Either way, those blank stone eyes have been staring out at the Pacific for centuries, keeping their secrets. From the most isolated island on Earth, let's descend underground to a discovery so old that it forced archaeologists to rethink the very origins of civilization itself. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt arrived at a rounded hill in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, which translates roughly to Potbelly Hill. Local farmers had been plowing around it for generations, occasionally turning up odd stones that they stacked along the edges of their fields. Schmidt took one look at those stones and realized they weren't natural, they were worked. He began to dig. What he found beneath that unassuming hill would become one of the most important archaeological discoveries in human history. Göbekli Tepe is a complex of massive stone circles, each defined by enormous T-shaped limestone pillars weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are decorated with elaborate relief carvings of animals: lions, foxes, scorpions, vultures, snakes, wild boar, rendered with artistic skill and anatomical accuracy. Some pillars feature stylized human arms and hands carved along their sides, as if the pillars themselves represent giant, faceless humanoid figures standing in a circle. None of this would be particularly shocking if the site dated to, say, 3000 BC, when we know organized societies existed. But radiocarbon dating placed the oldest structures at Göbekli Tepe to approximately 9600 BC, nearly 12,000 years ago. That's over 6,000 years before Stonehenge, over 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid. And here's the part that breaks the standard model of history. In 9600 BC, humans had not yet invented agriculture. They had not domesticated animals. They had no pottery, no metalworking, no written language, no permanent settlements. According to every textbook, they were nomadic hunter-gatherers living in small, mobile bands, following herds and foraging for plants. And yet, these supposedly primitive people organized the quarrying, transport, carving, and erection of multi-ton stone pillars into precisely arranged ritual complexes. The logistics alone, feeding a workforce of potentially hundreds over the months or years required for construction, imply a level of social organization that we didn't think was possible before farming. Schmidt himself believed that Göbekli Tepe inverted the conventional narrative. The standard story says agriculture came first, then permanent settlements, then organized religion. Schmidt argued that it was the other way around. The desire to build these sacred places drove humans to settle down and develop agriculture. Religion created civilization, not the other way around. But perhaps the greatest mystery of Göbekli Tepe is its ending. Around 8000 BC, someone deliberately buried the entire complex under tons of earth and rubble. They didn't abandon it. They didn't let it decay. They systematically and intentionally entombed it, preserving it almost perfectly for 10,000 years. Why would the builders spend generations constructing a monumental site and then spend almost as much effort hiding it? Were they protecting sacred knowledge for future generations? Sealing away something dangerous? Or performing a final ritual so significant that it required the sacrifice of the temple itself? The stones don't answer, they just wait. Let's leave Turkey and head to a place where the stones do something even stranger. They make sounds. In the Preseli Hills of Western Wales, there's a particular type of bluestone called spotted dolerite that has an unusual property. When struck, it rings like a bell. These are called ringing rocks or lithophones, and they produce clear, sustained musical tones that can carry across valleys. This wouldn't be more than a geological curiosity if it weren't for one extraordinary fact. These same bluestones were transported approximately 240 kilometers to Salisbury Plain in southern England, where they were erected as part of Stonehenge. The question of how Neolithic people moved 4-ton stones across 150 miles of rough terrain around 3000 BC has been debated for over a century. Recent geological work has pinpointed the exact quarry sites in Wales, Carn Godog and Craig Rossi Phelan, where the bluestones were extracted. Tool marks in the quarry match the period. Stone wedges used to split the rock from the bedrock have been found in situ. The path is increasingly clear, but the question that haunts researchers isn't how, it's why these particular stones. There were plenty of suitable rocks much closer to Salisbury Plain. Massive sarsen stones were quarried from Marlborough Downs, only 25 miles north. Why go 150 miles into Wales for a specific type of stone, unless that stone had a property that couldn't be found closer? In 2014, researchers from the Royal College of Art conducted acoustic testing of the Stonehenge bluestones and confirmed that a significant percentage of them are indeed lithophones. They produce metallic, bell-like tones when struck. The team proposed that the stones were selected specifically for their acoustic properties. Stonehenge, they suggested, may not have been just a temple or an astronomical observatory. It may have been a musical instrument, an enormous permanent lithophone designed to produce sound for rituals, healing ceremonies, or communication across distances. Sound healing is documented in cultures around the world, from Aboriginal Australian didgeridoo ceremonies to Tibetan singing bowls to Native American drum circles. If Stonehenge was an acoustic monument, it would represent the most ambitious sound-based structure ever built by prehistoric humans. The mainstream position remains cautious. Most archaeologists acknowledge the acoustic properties of the bluestones, but resist the leap to calling Stonehenge a musical instrument. They point out that many rocks ring when struck, and selection may have been based on cultural or spiritual associations with the Welsh landscape rather than acoustics per se. Fair enough, but the next time you see a photograph of Stonehenge, imagine it not as a silent ruin, but as an orchestra frozen in stone, waiting for someone to play it. From a stone orchestra in England, let's travel to the jungles of Costa Rica, where perfectly round objects emerge from the earth, and nobody can agree on why they exist. In the 1930s, workers from the United Fruit Company were clearing dense tropical forest in the Dikes Delta of southern Costa Rica to plant banana trees. As the machetes hacked through the undergrowth, they began uncovering stone spheres, dozens of them, scattered across the jungle floor like marbles dropped by a giant. The spheres ranged from a few centimeters in diameter to over 2 meters, with the largest weighing approximately 16 tons. And they were almost perfectly round, not roughly round, not kind of round. Measured with modern instruments, the best preserved spheres deviate from perfect sphericity by only a few millimeters across their entire surface. That's an astonishing level of precision for objects carved from hard gabbro and granodiorite using stone tools, presumably sometime between 600 AD and 1500 AD by the ancestors of the Barusa people. Over 300 spheres have been documented. Some were found in alignments, straight lines, triangular patterns, clusters of varying sizes, suggesting they were arranged deliberately according to some kind of plan. But what plan? The honest answer is that nobody knows. The pre-Columbian cultures of the Dikes Delta left no written records. The spheres themselves carry no inscriptions, no carvings, no decorations of any kind. They are pure, featureless geometry sitting in the jungle. Theories range from the practical to the cosmic. Some researchers have proposed that the spheres marked territorial boundaries or served as status symbols for powerful chiefs. Others suggest they were arranged to map astronomical alignments, stars, planets, solstices. A few fringe theorists have connected them to Atlantis, arguing that only a lost advanced civilization could achieve such geometric perfection. The archaeological evidence supports a more grounded but still fascinating interpretation. The spheres were clearly objects of great importance. Many were found near burial sites and elevated platforms. They were produced over a period of at least 900 years, suggesting a continuous cultural tradition rather than a one-time event. And the sheer labor involved in shaping a 16-ton rock into a near-perfect sphere using nothing but other rocks and sand, a process that would take years for a single object, tells us that whatever these stones meant to their makers, it was worth an extraordinary investment of time and human effort. UNESCO declared the stone spheres a World Heritage Site in 2014. They sit in parks and museums across Costa Rica now, polished and admired, still perfectly round, still perfectly silent. For our final discovery, let's go to a place that makes every other mystery on this list look young. To a South African mine, where objects were found in rocks so old that their existence borders on the absurd. Over the past several decades, miners working in the Wonderstone silver mine near Ottosdal, South Africa, have been pulling strange metallic spheres out of pyrophyllite deposits dated to approximately 2.8 billion years old. Let that number land for a moment. 2.8 billion years. That's over half the age of the Earth itself. That's over 2 billion years before the first multicellular organisms appeared. At the time these rock layers formed, the most complex life on Earth was single-celled bacteria floating in primordial oceans. And yet, embedded in this ancient rock, miners have found hundreds of small spheres, typically between 2.5 and 10 centimeters in diameter, with a hard bluish metal surface and, in some cases, 3 perfectly parallel grooves running around their equators. The Klerksdorp spheres, as they've come to be known, have been cited by alternative historians as evidence of intelligent design billions of years before mainstream science says intelligence existed. The grooves in particular have fueled speculation. 3 parallel lines circling a sphere don't look random. They look deliberate. They look manufactured. The mainstream geological explanation is that the spheres are natural concretions, mineral accumulations that form in sedimentary rock as dissolved minerals precipitate around a nucleus, much like pearls form inside oysters. The process is well documented and produces roughly spherical shapes in many geological contexts around the world. The grooves, geologists argue, are a result of the laminar structure of the surrounding pyrophyllite. The rock naturally separates along planes, leaving linear marks on the surface of embedded concretions. And when you cut the spheres open, they don't contain advanced materials. They're composed of hematite or wollastonite, common minerals. There's no hidden technology inside, just rock. And yet, the precision of the grooves on some specimens is difficult to explain through purely natural processes. The near-perfect sphericity of the best examples exceeds what concretion models typically predict. And the sheer number of spheres found in a relatively small area raises questions about whether simple mineral precipitation is the whole story. The Klerksdorp spheres probably aren't ancient artifacts. The weight of evidence points firmly toward natural geology, but they serve as a powerful reminder of how strange the natural world can be, and how easy it is to see intention where there might only be physics and time doing what physics and time do, quietly, for billions of years. So, where does that leave us? We've traveled from a sunken Roman ship in the Mediterranean to the frozen heights of the Bolivian Andes. We've crossed the Pacific to the loneliest island on Earth and descended into a Turkish hillside that hid the oldest temple ever found. We've listened for the music locked inside Welsh bluestones, rolled perfect stone spheres through Costa Rican jungles, and held metallic orbs pulled from rock older than complex life itself. 7 discoveries, 7 puzzles. And not a single one of them fits neatly into the story we've been told about who we are and what our ancestors were capable of. Does that mean aliens built the Antikythera Mechanism? Probably not. Does it mean Atlantean engineers machined the stones at Puma Punku? Almost certainly not. But here's what it does mean. The human story is far stranger, far richer, and far more surprising than any single textbook can contain. We have consistently underestimated the ingenuity, the ambition, and the sheer creative madness of the people who came before us. They looked at multi-ton stones and saw statues waiting to walk. They looked at the night sky and built bronze computers to predict its movements. They looked at a hilltop in Turkey and decided to build a cathedral 6,000 years before anyone thought to plant a seed. Maybe the real mystery isn't how they did these things. Maybe the real mystery is why we keep being surprised that they could. History isn't a straight line. It never was. It's a spiral, full of rises and collapses, of knowledge gained and catastrophically lost, of civilizations that climb to astonishing heights and then vanish so completely that we forgot they ever existed. And if that's true, then here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. What do we know right now, today, that the world might forget 1,000 years from tomorrow? Tell me in the comments. Which of these 7 discoveries do you think holds the biggest secret? Which one deserves its own deep dive? Let me know. And if this video made you see the past a little differently, hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot more buried history to dig up together. Until next time.